In this video, I'm going to tell you how I tried really hard to buy a Canon camera and I still ended up buying a Sony camera. So here's what's happening. I'm making some changes to my camera gear, what's in my camera bag, and I was looking for a point and shoot camera. Yes, that's right. I was looking for a point and shoot camera to use alongside some of my other full frame pro gear. One of the things I was looking for was vlogging capability, which means the camera had to have a flip up screen so that I could see myself and frame myself and check the exposure, and it needed to have a mic input jack so that I could get good audio and a bunch of other features. So there are a number of cameras on the market that could do this, including one of the cameras that I have right now that I've been using to vlog so far, which is the Sony a6400. But I was looking for something smaller in a point and shoot with a, say, 1-inch sensor. There are a number of cameras that fit the bill. I was looking at the Canon G7X Mark II. That is a camera that a number of people have been using for vlogging over the last few years. It's been one of the more popular vlogging cameras. There were rumors that Canon would release a G7X Mark III. I waited for that to come out. It was released, and well, the first thing is that the specs were somewhat underwhelming, to be honest. One of the things that was interesting was that they were talking about how they were using a sensor that, well, it's not a new sensor, it's actually a very old sensor, but it's new in that it had never been used on non-Sony cameras. So it's a Sony sensor that was being used for the first time outside of a Sony camera. Well, this sensor is a sensor that was used on the Sony RX100 Mark III. That's years ago. Sony are now up to the RX100 Mark VII. So this sensor is now being used in a brand new Canon camera that they just released. There were also concerns that the camera didn't have dual pixel autofocus, which is Canon's more advanced autofocus capability. So people were concerned that the autofocus performance might not be very good. And generally, there were not many other new features in the camera, and some things that people had expected that were missing. People started to get the camera and use it. Reviews were released, and here's the thing. It's, by all accounts, a total lemon. It looks like Canon totally screwed up this release. One of the things that's interesting and most concerning is the autofocus capability is really, it's not just not good, it's terrible. It's pretty much broken by the looks of it. There are many tests that people have done and they put on YouTube, and these are people, by the way, who have used the G7X Mark II before, so they know what they're doing, testing out the Mark III, and the camera is not even focusing on people. It just looks absolutely atrocious, unusable, to the point that people said that they would have no choice but to return the camera. And here's the thing, shortly after Canon announced and released that camera, Sony announced and released their new RX100 camera, the Mark VII, which is this camera here. I just got it yesterday, and it's actually the camera that I'm shooting this video on right now. So let's just talk about, you can find out lots about this camera and all the amazing features that are in it. But let's just talk about autofocus, because that's what we were just talking about with the Canon G7X Mark III. So in the RX100 Mark VII, Sony put video eye autofocus. So what that means is that as you're shooting video, as I'm doing right now, the camera is detecting the eyes, and so right now in the flip up screen I can see a little white box around this eye, and when I go here it's now around this eye, and it switches, and no matter where I go my eyes are always in focus. That is a fantastic feature. This is the first camera with it, and the Sony a7R IV full frame camera that Sony have announced and are releasing in September will also have it, and I'm sure all future Sony cameras will have it. And the RX100 Mark VII also has animal eye autofocus that I've talked about in some of my other videos, which if you're a wildlife photographer is a fantastic feature, and has many other features as well. I've talked about the A9, and the RX100 Mark VII has A9, some of the A9 capability in terms of focus tracking and burst mode. So it's a fantastic little camera. And a number of people who were going to buy or bought the Canon G7X Mark III and were bitterly disappointed have now gone and bought this camera, the Sony RX100 Mark VII. And that's exactly what I've done. So I tried really hard to buy the Canon G7X Mark III, and I ended up buying a Sony camera again. I know a lot of people probably think I'm a Sony fanboy. I don't just use Sony equipment. In the past I've used other systems. It just so happens right now I'm using a lot of Sony gear. I was quite happy. I was actually looking forward to the idea of using something else in my kit that was not Sony, and Canon, you totally screwed it up. And here's the thing right now, that if you look at what's happening in the mirrorless market, especially in the pro mirrorless market, Sony are killing it. The rate of innovation is fantastic. The capabilities that they're releasing in their cameras, and the speed at which they're getting product releases out there is incredible. In the last couple of months they announced the Sony A7 Mark IV, which I've talked about in another video. I pre-ordered 2 of those. Tons of people have pre-ordered them. I'm sure they will be a very hot item. 61 megapixel sensor, incredible, and lots of other features. Then they announced this camera, the RX100 Mark VII. There are apparently some more announcements coming at the end of August, possibly about some new APS-C cameras. So they're really killing it. And here's the thing, Canon and other manufacturers certainly do not need, they're already going to have such a hard time to catch up to Sony. Sony made this big bet on mirrorless, and they forged ahead, and it's really paid off for them. So Canon and Nikon and the other manufacturers will already have a really hard time catching up. They do not need to be, Canon certainly does not need to be shooting themselves in the foot with a totally screwed up release like the G7X Mark III. Now fortunately, it's just a point and shoot, so it's not a pro mirrorless camera that they released that's a total dud. But it's not a good indicator, is it? So Canon, you guys need to get your act together. Sony, awesome job on the RX100 Mark VII. So far I'm loving it. Lives up to its expectations. Now of course it's not perfect. There are some things that could definitely be improved, and you know, no camera system is perfect. My other Sony cameras that I use, I love them, but there's definitely things that I would like to see improved and added. But they're doing a good job, and Canon, you guys need to get your act together. Okay, so that's my story for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching this and finding out a little bit about the controversy behind the G7X Mark III. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.